Welcome to another episode of PG fucking Radio. On this episode of my podcast, I am sitting down with Adam Calderon. Is that what he's
Calderon.
Calderon. So it's a very westernized pronunciation of what I'm assuming is a very...
It's a Spanish Latino name.
Right.
If you want to roll the R.
Yeah.
But I just don't have that linguistic ability to do that.
Okay.
Calderon.
Adam is also my teacher's assistant for a particular class. Him and I, we struck some sort of a friendship, even though I'm reticent to call it a friendship until the student-teacher relationship that Barrier's been met with at the end of the semester. But we have some sort of an intellectual overlap, let me call that, where we have ended up discussing some of the more interesting stuff. So we have these very vibrant exchange of notes after every class that we sit through, and that has really helped me think through some of the more complex psychological puzzles that I deal with in my head. So thank you so much for allowing me to do that. It is so weird in my head that something like this occurs, where it started off as this random 15-minute or like random 30-second stop by after class when I was like, I think it's uncertainty. If you remember, I remember saying that sentence to you. And I've been thinking about that almost unconsciously as I've been walking through the streets of New York City. And that idea is beginning to get more solid in my head, where I've certainly come to believe that there is so much merit to... have you heard of Edward Torrey Higgins?
No, I haven't. Oh, Torrey Higgins,
Yes.
Columbia psychology professor.
Right.
Columbia, yeah.
He has a whole theoretical notion of shared reality. Have you heard of that?
No, what is it?
So, he basically thinks that psychology needs to start reevaluating its priorities in terms of understanding human psyche, that the basic elements that we've been using to discover the way we think have been wrong. And he says that the fundamental unit of psychological processes is the creation of shared reality. He takes all the concepts we've had in conventional psychology, from things like cognitive dissonance to anchoring and adjustment, all those little factors and effects that we have, and he's sort of shown how they're all dependent on this concept, on this desire to create a shared reality.
What are those elements that you're talking about? You mentioned elements.
So, like,
what's an element? Can you give me an example?
Okay, let me give you a more contextual example from the class that we've been doing. Attachment theory, right? That is an element that we place in the mix of understanding the grander puzzle of psychology as a whole. That there is a concept of attachment styles. He would say there is no attachment styles as such. What there is at the base of it is this need to share reality and the defects that come with it. So he's binarized it to sharing reality and not sharing reality, and then started building the puzzle up from there. And here is how he delineates that to some degree. He says that as the child matures, everything from linguistic, developmental psychology to language learning processes are all a consequence of me wanting to share my reality with you, because that provides me an optimum feedback loop mechanism for survival purposes. And I think the obvious precursor of that belief would be that all phenomena occurs here, not outside. All phenomena is a consequence of psychological limitation. And therefore, the only way to verify my psychological accuracy is to share that phenomena and the reality with you. And only once it's verified do I know this is actually a laptop and this is actually a mic and we are actually doing a podcast and I'm not dreaming it up and you are not sitting here wondering what the fuck am I saying. So that's his basic claim. He's trying to almost reinvent psychology in that sense. And I found that decent.
And in some way you're trying to reinvent, I'm not sure what domain, but with this idea of uncertainty and how that's kind of underlying and implicit in a lot of our discussions or even behaviors that we do in daily life. And you were mentioning in one of our essays of you wanting to do a study about this. What exactly are you trying to test? I'm curious.
I think this is a good place to tell you what I was trying to test. I thought about, for the longest time when I got into evolutionary psychology and I got into thinking about emotion and whatnot and what is the meaning of life, and I understood that death is in some sense what gives meaning to life. And I made the automatic attribution that it is death itself that scares the mortal hell out of us, which bleeds meaning to life. It's the fear of death is the ultimate fear, and from there all other fears and emotions sort of emerge. But my recent guess has been that it's not fear of death, but fear of uncertainty. And the reason why I feel that is because fear of death has been negated historically all the time. And you know what that instrument has been? Religion. As soon as there was a promise for reincarnation, as soon as there was a promise for 72 virgins,
The opium of the masses.
Right, and there's an interesting line to pull there as well, the opium of the masses. But I can negate the fear of death by adding certainty to it, and then suddenly you will walk happily into death, as if that was salvation for you, as if that was the meaning to your life that you were seeking. So in some sense, fear of death is negated by certainty. It is the feeling of absolute uncertainty that emerges out of as a imagination of death, that we are scared of it. I don't think death inherently is scary. I think it's the uncertainty in death that is truly scary. Now, I don't know how to design that study. I don't know how somebody would do that. But that's my philosophical conclusion. What do you think about that?
Well, in terms of like research methodology, it would be difficult because
I'm not going to ask people to explode. Like
I'm just trying to think about this logistically and pragmatically. See, how do you take something so intricate and so grand into something objective that could be measured by qualitative measures? Like, I feel like it wouldn't be doing the justice by, here's a survey, and then please answer my questions, and then do correlate statistics based off certain like correlations, right?
Right.
But perhaps is this a question of...
What do you think about it on a philosophical level? Like, what do you think of this idea that... Because if I posit it to any serious psychologist, any serious evolutionary psychologist, any serious or any serious philosopher, they would have a truck. It's not the most easily sellable idea, right? They'll be like, wait a second, but are you sure? Is it really certainty and uncertainty, and that's the only scale that we operate on? What do you think about that idea? What's your academic guess? What's your intellectual guess?
Well, just tying into clinical psychology and such, uncertainty oftentimes is the predicate of like anxiety and a lot of mental disorders as well. Where I remember we were talking about this study in class, where an individual would rather choose to experience negative affect and depressive symptoms rather than experience the state of uncertainty. But in terms of a philosophical kind of notion, I'm not sure, because I would have to give this more thought.
Right.
And once again, I'm not a person of... And I've always thought to myself of how, like, my role in academia and my role, at least in this universe. And I often find myself, and I think I talked to you about this beforehand, I'm not the person with the answers, but I'm the person with the questions.
Right. No, absolutely. My questions... are less smarter than yours, only more aggressive. My sense of curiosity takes over. And so my question appear in the form of guesses. And then what I do is I try to have idea sex with people, where I shoot an idea across to somebody like you or to somebody like Scott or whoever I can find, very honestly. And then I'm like, what do you think? And it gets me in all kinds of weird places. But here is what I think. We went over this concept in class as well, where we were talking about neuroticism and how the neurotic personality prefers the devil it knows over the devil it doesn't. Now let's slightly flip those conditions. These devils that I have to face as a neurotic or non-neurotic person, say these devils are continued for infinite time. I have to face this devil without knowing when this devil goes away. I think as soon as that situation emerges, all of us behave like neurotic people, where we will pick the devil we know than the devil we don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's why that's why dysfunctional relationships exist, right? There's a time sunk fallacy of, despite its dysfunction and its debilitating effect on my psyche and my well-being, it's what I've known, it's what I know. So the extent of leaving this context is the uncertainty, the unknown.
Right.
And I would rather be with this than something I'm not familiar with.
Right. And so as soon as we make the case for that, it turns out that that we are, I would say, violently aversive to uncertainty. As soon as there is no stop to the uncertainty, we are just like, I do not want this. And it's not because that might be death, it's because death is uncertain. And that's sort of the philosophical inversion in terms of a paradigm that I've been thinking about. It's just a thought in my head, and that's sort of the question that I wanted to ask Scott the other day as well when we met for the colloquia meeting, was that I have all these interesting brain farts that sometimes I have two types of thoughts. One, I'm delusional, that I think my brain parts are interesting and nobody else does. Or I am sitting on some sort of a gold mine that needs to be cultivated and then capitalized in the outside world. And I want to ask him how I go about doing that. Because I think of a domain called psychophilosophy or philosophic psychology, like a mixture of the two, where I have a philosophical guess based on psychological evidence.
Sure.
And
sounds like cognitive science in some capacity.
But isn't cognitive science more quantitative?
Yes.
Right? I want to skip that.
Not cognitive psychology, cognitive science.
Oh, cognitive science.
Yes.
So tell me about cognitive science. What does it entail?
I don't remember, to be honest.
Right. But it's roughly along the lines of the kind of stuff that I talk about. Would you say? Because then I'll just look into it like a rabid dog.
I would recommend looking into it, but I couldn't tell you right now.
What are your interests in psychology like? What is it that you're interested in?
I have a wide range of interests, and that's also a struggle I have even to this day of what one wants to focus on, because a lot of the times I struggle with this idea that, just to preface this, before I even tell you what my interests are,
right?
I'll tell you a story. I was in Germany about 2 years ago for a conference. So about 120 scientists kind of coming together and collaborating on questions on the mind, brain, and behavior. And we had a philosopher by the name of Claire Péterméjean, I believe. And she's a very well-known philosopher in France. And she created this, I think, small subfield of phenomenology called microphenomenology. I don't know if I believe it or not, or if it even has credibility to it, but this is what she was known for. And what her focus was in terms of a technique used in cognitive science to get and attain a first-person subjective viewpoint of experience unraveling. So it's a instead of a questionnaire, it would be a way of doing introspection. It's almost like a mixture of interviewing with a little bit of psychodynamic kind of lines of questioning to get deeper into the insight of a certain experience.
I was going to ask you that. Is this the kind of stuff that we see on TV when they talk about therapists, where it's like, so what do you think about that? And that makes you think, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And her thing is, we focus too much of the what of the experience and not the how, right? The little intricacies of things unraveling. None of that is important. Because I'm going on tangents, but that's what I like to do.
Right.
But we were in this group, and she was discussing her ideas, right? The one that she's these ideas of microphenomenology, and there were little discussion groups in a little circle, maybe around 8 people, and I forgot the individual who did it, but one individual called her out and said, "I don't understand any of this. This is bullshit. This is pseudoscience." Whatever it may be. And instead of rationally providing evidence for her ideas, and once again, this is ideas that she has dedicated her life to, you would think one would be equipped to answer those questions.
Absolutely.
But instead, what did she do?
She breaks down.
She breaks down with a temper tantrum. And I've never experienced that in my life. I felt, something is interesting is going on here, right? And my conclusion was, why did she break down a temper tantrum? Because in academia, what we do and what we study and what our interests are so much intertwined with who we are. Mm-hmm. An attack on one's theories is an attack on oneself, my own personal self-worth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when I get asked, what am I interested in? I'm not sure, because there is not this one single line of interest that I'm so passionate about, but rather I'm curious about lots of different things. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, a lot of it is superficial. Mm-hmm. Superficial in the sense of I know very basic ideas from many different things, mm-hmm. but when you search deeper, I don't know the deeper meaning behind the things.
Right.
Setting that aside, I think what my interests are, the first one is the etiology of psychopathology. How do mental disorders look like? Mm-hmm. How are they shaped? Mm-hmm. How are they influenced? And how do they combine and construct these? How do mental disorders occur, right? So typically, we view mental disorders as a latent entity, right? Mm-hmm. And also coming from and stemming from a medicalized kind of
a defect
or a it's coming from it's coming from medicine, mm-hmm. rather than psychology, I think, in some sense. And mm-hmm. what I mean by that is, like, using a medical diagnosis, we think we think mental disorders as entities that come upon us and we get struck by them, and then we have something, right? Like a tumor, right? Mm-hmm. We have a tumor, mm-hmm. and then we need to observe, but using medical instruments to identify this and localize where this tumor is, and then we need to come up with implementations to remove this, and then it will the disorder will cease because this tumor is causing the symptoms. So, in the same sense, mm-hmm. we get struck by flu, mm-hmm. and then we have the flu, right? Mm-hmm. So in the same sense, we're living our lives, everything's normal, and then all of a sudden, we get hit by depression. No, I don't think that works like that at all. And I have ideas of how that works. But your question, though.
Yeah. So it seems like what you're championing for in that argument is this movement away from the conventional medical approach to treating illnesses. And you were championing for moving it towards a more integrated sort of a way of approaching psychopathology. Yes. Because I have inherent skepticism as soon as the mind is reduced to the brain. Mm-hmm. As soon as somebody says, hey, if you're anxious, take these benzodiazepines, I think...
But does that mean that the brain is not involved in these processes?
No.
Of course not. It's essential. It's a core.
Undoubtedly, but is it it?
Yes.
Right? Exactly. That's where it's at, right?
Because guess what? If it was it, then there would be a Nobel Prize for that individual or group of individuals, because you just solved
the puzzle. You just solved it, man. Like that's the pinnacle of human understanding, is to understand where conscious experience is coming from. That's why people are making all these weird guesses, and that's okay. Like,
yes, that's the point of science. Right. Because guess what? Same thing with psychiatry and even some forms of psychological diagnoses, right? Mm-hmm. The DSM is a set of criteria to diagnose someone with a disorder. But guess what? These are just our best guesses. But people don't realize that. They take it as absolute fact, truth, and it's the Holy Bible, right?
It's the gold standard.
Yes.
So this movement is almost... to describe this movement, I think in a digestible bit, is a movement away from this intermittent onset of disease to a more continuous happening that leads to a certain threshold being crossed into psychopathology, right? Mm-hmm. It's the difference between a disease that, I got infected with virus, I have jaundice now, I got infected with so-and-so and I have pneumonia now, then that there is a slow build-up that is happening in the background. And you are interested more in what is happening in the background than what shows up once the threshold has been crossed.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. And so the research I'm really interested in right now, there's a really small subfield in computational psychology right now, using certain methodologies that are adapted and translated from data science,
right?
Specifically using networks. If you can imagine social network theory, how individuals or certain groups of friends or people are connected with one another.
Right.
Individuals or whatever it may be
Right.
as the nodes, and then certain lines to see how they're connected.
Right.
Or how certain societies are connected, or how ideologies or ideas get polarized, so on and so forth.
Right.
Gets translated into clinical science context, where instead of individuals as the nodes, you have symptoms, right? So right now, the main kind of battle of psychiatry right now is what's the etiology of the symptomology of disorders. So you typically have two different types of way of trying to categorize this, right? Let's use depression. The first one is a categorical model, where you have a checklist, just a checklist. You match this. If you match 5 out of 7,
you're in.
You're in, right?
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And then the second one is a dimensional approach, which is just a spectrum. You know, everyone's depressed, maybe with just a little bit more, or past the threshold, and now we can meet this criteria, right? And both are valid ways of looking at it.
Yeah.
This way of using networks is like throwing a curveball completely, where it's saying, actually, no, both are wrong, and kind of pointing to Thomas Kuhn and how paradigm shifts occur. This is just my sole opinion, and who am I to say, because I'm just a naive grad student. But I do think it will lead or be a variable in a scientific revolution of mental disorders. And that is, as technology increases with machine learning, artificial intelligence, I think there's lots of potential here. But going back to my point of mental networks and mental disorders.
Right.
So let's say you have symptoms as nodes. So let's say, for instance, going back to that same example of depression, right? What does depression look like from a categorical model? You have anhedonia, you have lack of...
you have apathy.
Apathy, thank you. Less sleep.
Right. Less appetite.
Loss of concentration, etc., right?
9 symptoms, sort of roughly, right? Like
yes. So I believe, and this is not coming from my research. I'm interested in this research, but I'm not championing this research. Most of this research is coming from the University of Amsterdam by a research group led by Denny Borsbin. But it's slowly coming to America, at least its interest. But network analysis is it's a huge kind of methodology to understand mental, or just in the psychological field in the first place. But
right.
So imagine the domino effect, right, of one thing impacting another, right? So let's say you have, you're living a regular life, right? Things are good. It's not you're in life. You might have some days. You might have some good days, some bad days, but then you have an external variable. Let's say stress or a loss of a loved one, right? Something that may kind of disturb one's psyche. So stress comes in, and then that creates one symptom. Maybe let's say it's stress. It's finals, right? So you now have lack of sleep, right? Because you have to study more, you have to concentrate more, right? You have lack of sleep. That lack of sleep now leads to less sleep. So guess what? That leads to loss of concentration, right? That loss of concentration may lead to let me think of right here. Loss of concentration may lead to
lesser performance.
Which
leads to less self-confidence, all of that, right? It's a cyclic.
Yes, it's a cyclic thing, right? And the point is, there's so much heterogeneity in the DSM and diagnoses and psychopathology. For instance, I think PTSD is the outlier in terms of the variations. that could be matched to get the diagnosis. But I think it's over like 800,000 different types of variations of symptoms being met to actually
constitute
PTSD, and same for any diagnosis, right? And I think that's a huge concern, because we have this fallacy of, when we talk about schizophrenia or depression or anxiety, we're talking about the same entity. Yes, but in the same sense, there's many thousands of different ways to come up to that same constitution of the phenomena, like the phenomena one may be experiencing. So I think this leads to kind of individualize, and also not individualized but personalized medicine, right? Where you can kind of attack chief symptoms or symptoms of centrality that cause and have the most interconnection to one's kind of quote unquote network, right? So perhaps by using certain statistics, you can identify the symptom that is most central, the most connected, and has the most influence over other symptoms. So if you can attack that, it'd be more efficacious than
finding the periphery and then coming to the center. You can start with the center. Right. It seems like from like a commentary standpoint of the entire phenomenon of understanding what psychopathology has been for the scientific community as a whole, it's been succumbing to the fact that the subjective experience, we are fraught when it comes to being able to describe the subjective experience. There is a conflict between our ability to use the technology of language, which is an objectifying medium, and the subjective experience that we have as individuals. I think there was, and tell me if I'm inaccurate with the history of this particular science, but there was a movement from psychoanalysis to psychology, be that through the means of behaviorism and all of that as the 20th century progressed. I think to truly understand the human phenomena, the phenomena of the human psychology, we need to go back to subjectively understanding it. And the case for that is very much similar to what you're saying. There has been an increase in the gradations or increase in nuance as we have gone forward in our approach to understanding psychopathology, from it is to it is not, from the binary to a scale to now a nodal network of many pieces that need to be connected in a very intricate fashion for it to constitute that, right? But on a more personal level, I had a question, and I think it would help us both answer that question if I take it upon myself. And that question is this: you said something along the lines of, I am a naive grad student who, I'm not the champion of this voice, I am somebody who's interested in this research.
Of course.
Right? And there is a deficit of what I might call as somebody who's not Adam, and a lack of self-belief. Right? I might say, Adam, you need to believe in yourself. That's what somebody else might tell you too, in that sense. You need to think you're already, like, how, if I were to tell you that I don't feel like an authority on something, if I were to tell you that I don't feel as competent as I come across, what would you say to me? How would you bridge that gap in terms of the way I see myself and in terms of the way the world sees me? You see what I mean? Like, when have I or you or any of us, or Scott, or for that matter any of us we know, have grown enough for our views to be considered in the mature space of ideas? When does that happen? Because we are young thinkers, we are young and very curious individuals. When do we give ourselves a certificate of having grown up?
That's a fantastic question, and also a tip, an interview tip. When someone says that's a great question or that's a fantastic question, so that means they don't know the answer.
So you're doing both our jobs here right now.
No, but let me tell you this. I think there is no certain stage. Life is not a developmental stage where you meet this criteria, this step, and then you move forward. Right. You know, congrats. You now are a PhD student. Now you graduated. Now guess what? You're just an adjunct. Now you're an associate. Now you're tenured. No. I think it's a cognitive switch one has, and I'll give you a story. There is a artist that I particularly enjoy. his work. David Cho. David Cho is a graffiti artist, and also quite a outlier in society in terms of, you know, he would be hopping trains. He was arrested in Japan, and he spent 3 months in jail. He did not participate in society. If that makes sense. And
I'm just gonna move this a little backwards because this is too close to you and your voice might break. Yeah,
sure.
Right, please.
And he continued with his work, and eventually his work got noticed by an individual. You might know him, Mark Zuckerberg. And this was before Facebook was created, and they liked his art, and they told him, unfortunately, we're creating this company, and we think it's going to be big, and it's going to revolutionize society, but we just don't have the money to pay you right now. Would you like to be a part of our company in terms of creating the murals at the company, and we'll give you 5% stock, or we'll give you $50,000. And he was a homeless individual. He really needed the money. And he took, because he was a gambling addict, he took the stock. And that stock ended up being like $400 million. And then overnight, he became the richest artist in the world. Right? I remember him, I was listening to a podcast once of him speaking of how does an artist determine, you know, when their art is worth, you know, $50 and $200,000, right? Who is the individual that critiques that and places that value?
Where is the assessment scale?
Yes.
Yeah.
And his answer was one's own self-worth. It's subjective. It's how much they believe
In their shit.
In their shit, right? So one day his painting was $100, and then one day he realized, I really like this painting. I think I did a great job, and it really has a lot of sentimental value for me. And I'm gonna
sell it for so much.
I'm gonna sell it for $10,000.
Yeah.
And then an individual would buy that, right? Because he places that subjective value.
Right.
But that's art is a whole different thing compared to.
I think ideas are art. I truly think one of the fundamental mysteries of the human psyche is we don't understand where creativity flourishes. We don't know how it occurs. Like the best guesses we have are Scott Kaufman's research. Like, quite honestly, we just genuinely do not know. And I think ideas are art if they are manufactured properly.
Yes.
But my recent ponderings, especially after my interview with Scott, because I've been mentioning him over and over because he became a sort of a turning point in the way I see myself, because he stopped the interview halfway through and he's like, this is a great conversation, and I'm like, why is he saying that? Like, I have so much respect for this man. Why is he only saying this because I'm a student of it? But there was merit to that, and that's when I started giving myself the validation. You were doing a good job, man, right? Then the other day, this Friday, when we met, me and Scott at the meeting, and then Scott said something along the lines of, you were ready to run. It looks like you're ready to graduate and take a run. And I've been thinking about it since. It put me in a trance, you know. I get into trance.
I would agree as well.
Right? And you don't know what you saying that or him saying that or any of the people around me saying that does to me. It puts me in a trance. I end up wondering for hours. Sometimes even I have sleepless nights wondering why. And then I come to a place where I'm like, I should not wonder why. What I should wonder is, or what the question that I'm grappling with now is that, is there an art to dreaming big? Because for the first time I found myself liberated enough to dream humongous.
Yes.
And I'm sure you do too.
Yes.
What is your art of dreaming big?
Yes. So there's levels to my answer here. The first level would now also answer your initial question of my statement of being a naive grad student and why I said that.
Right.
But the first answer is, I've always dreamt big, so big, and just to kind of backpack what Steve Jobs said, right, during one kind of address to one of his audiences. He said when he was younger that he realized that the world that we live in now is created by individuals no smarter than you.
Huh.
And because of that, you do have the capacity
Right.
to change the world, you know?
Right.
And it made me realize,
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating, because I thought, this was when I was younger, this is like middle school, high school,
Mm-hmm.
of I'm this individual in this life, in this society, and it's almost like a passive relation,
Mm-hmm.
where who am I to say I'm
Right.
going to not I'm not going to step on anyone's toes.
Right.
I'm going to just meander my way through,
Right.
and I don't have any influence. But in
Uh-huh.
reality,
I have all the
I
influence.
have all the influence.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And but I think it's important though,
Mm-hmm.
when one has grand ambitions,
Mm-hmm.
to have a great support system around you.
Mm-hmm.
No one, I mean, unless you're like a 1 in a million savant,
Mm-hmm.
no one accomplishes anything without great mentors and
Right.
teachers.
Right.
And if you're fortunate enough, then one could be on the road to success, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here is what I have come up with in trying to understand the art of dreaming big, at least for myself. I think one of the strongest faculties that I have is to very honestly be able to observe the workings of my brain, to at least be able to tell myself the truth on a continuous level. So here is what I've discerned, and tell me what you think of it from an academic standpoint. I think there is two major voices in your head: the voice of false optimism and the voice of hedge, right? And this is how they operate, sort of.
Hedge is what?
I'll break that down. So you know how depression is a state of hyper-reality? It's when you feel reality so real that it's almost more than...
And also a hyper-focus on certain stimuli, right?
Right.
You oftentimes focus on negative
Uh-huh.
stimuli compared to positive stimuli. I think that was a study
Right,
done
right.
by June Gruber, I believe.
Okay, let me make that case because I think this will be interesting. So here's what I think. I think if you were to test empirically whether Adam can change the world, the evidence is no, because there is no empirical evidence, right? We have no data for that, right? But there is a sense of false optimism with which we all live our lives. It's called belief, and we try to manifest those beliefs, right? That is the voice of false optimism that tells you you can do that. As a consequence of having that voice and to maintain rationality and not run beyond your means, you have a voice of hedge that hedges your bet, that tells you, listen, do not go too far. And it's what voice you reify that structures the future of your reality. Some people reify the voice of the hedge too much. Sometimes some people reify this one too much. But there has to be a certain balance. And that's why when people bump across self-doubt, including myself, self-doubt is so cloudy that you cannot see through. What is really happening in self-doubt is the voice of hedge is warning you. And what you must do is accept it for what it is and be careful how you move forward. But I think the ultimate act of dreaming big is getting rid of the fear of what happens after the revolution. I think the seminal fear with dreaming big is what happens if I actually get it done. It's what happens when the dog finally gets the car.
Yes, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, and that's where you and I are like, we are naive because we don't want to assume the fact that we might be competent enough in the future to own that position, whatever that position might be. And that's something I've been struggling with, dealing with myself. That's something I've been thinking about for the longest time for my private self.
And it's almost like a you're on this journey, this almost, I wouldn't call it a hedonistic treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I'm not sure what I'm grasping for.
It's a treadmill for sure.
But something that provides you a little bit of oomph, a little bit of motivation, initiative of this is why, even though it's so vague, right? Mm-hmm. Of what pushes you, but once you actually get that, what's next, right?
What's next?
And like you were saying though, or what I was saying, but based off what you were saying, of what are you gonna do with it, right? And that's a scary thought. I think
it's a very scary thought because we don't trust ourselves. I'd be hard fought to, if I were to be like, okay, I'm going to create the perfect platform for discussion of ideas. How do I make sure my bias does not sink in? I cannot even trust myself to not let my bias sink in conversations like this. I think it's too much power for an individual, and our mind on some level recognizes that. But the architecture of the society does not. So it retains the capacity to instill these individuals with this magnified sense of power.
Well, you said that was really contemplative, by the way. Did you notice that?
Which one?
The distinction between two voices and then the kind of elucidation of it.
Right.
And then why I said contemplative is because in some sense, in contemplative science, your life, or at least your perception of your life, is just the accumulation of what you give your thoughts, or how you pay attention to your thoughts. What do you feed, right?
I think perception is gestalt. I think gestalt perception, we have that concept in visual perceptual psychology. I think what appears is what it is, because we behave according to that. I think functional reality is far more powerful than this absolute pure reality that we imagine, this world of facts and objects. That doesn't exist. It has no bearing on my behavior. It's what I see when I look at Adam, not what Adam is. I don't even have the mental real estate to think of what Adam is. It's what he appears to me. And I think most of our decisions come out of that. A question I often pose to people is when they elucidate a problem that has society-wide, community-wide, species-wide impacts. I'm like, if you were to pick one index only, one index, whatever it might be, with which you'd want everybody to be conscious of while engaging with that particular variety of activity, what would it be? So in the case of political discourse, what would it be? And I double down on free speech. I think a fair and steady discussion of ideas for what they are is very important. If you can optimize that index, you can solve a lot of the problems that are happening underneath. Right? I wouldn't do that with empathy or compassion. I don't think they're the answers. I wouldn't do that with pull yourself up by the bootstraps or any of those kind of things in the political sphere. I would go with free speech. I think it's the perfect index to optimize political consistency. So what is one place you can expect everybody to be conscious? Because I cannot ask people to be conscious in more than one place. I cannot hold them accountable for that. Everybody operates on an automatic principle. There is so much happening inside here for me to deal with stuff that is beyond that. Right? And with that, I want to encircle back to the question on psychopathology, because I think you would have some very interesting insights. I think as a species, we are struggling with trying to understand the concept of anxiety and the concept of depression, which are the two more foundational psychopathologies, if they are at all. Because
just because of the frequency, that's why.
Yeah, because I think they'll be normal in the next 20-30 years. The majority of the human population will have depression and anxiety, and then I don't know if it's a defect from normal, more so than normal itself. What do you think? What's depression in your view? What's anxiety in your view?
What depression and anxiety is in my own viewpoint.
Right, yeah.
I'm going to try my best to give you an answer that's just off the top of my head. I have not rehearsed.
No, that's exactly what I want you to do.
I have not thought about. It's almost like
a guess.
A psychoanalytical technique of free association.
Please,
right?
Exactly what I want. I don't want the book. There's a book outside there for people to read. I want Adam, right?
I think for me, depression seems like a loss of meaning and a sense of depersonalization of one's connection to the world and humans in general. And then what creates that? I don't know. What creates depression?
How much would you place the blame on place culpability on the individual, and how much would you place it on the architecture of the society? What's your best guess?
60-40?
60 on the individual, 40 on the society?
Yeah. But what is the statistic, I just
right, of course, it's like a random guess. But did you see The Joker?
I have not.
Okay. I was just riffing through an article earlier by I think it was by Zizek, or one of the people who follow his line of thought, and he was saying that what the film does is it delineates in absolute detail what he calls a systemic deadlock, where, and I come from a very, I mean, 6 months ago, I was a very conservative-minded person in my thought. I was like, pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get your act together, man. Like, you've got to do this. It's upon you. There is nobody else that's going to come and fix it. I get that. But I no longer think my personal philosophy can be extrapolated to my political philosophy. I think that's a mistake a lot of us commit when we think about politics. Is the way I treat myself is the way I treat my political situation. I think those are different objects. And here is what I think about systemic deadlocks. I think very often our institutions are aligned in a way where our objects are not optimized. And that is what you referred to earlier when you spoke of that one philosopher who broke down. Because what academia does is it personalizes ideas to people. And then if you were to expect this individual to, if you were to expect Scott to be like, hey, can you go and look into this other way of thinking about creativity? He's going to be like, are you saying the last 20 years of my life have been a lie? Who's willing to walk with that? Who's even willing to consider that? He's seen the data. You know what I mean? I think academia as a system is riddled with cognitive dissonance at its core. And that's why it has such a hard time having revolutions. That's why we have things like Thomas Kuhn's book. Like, that's exactly why Copernicus was so hard fraught in trying to make the case for heliocentrism, that the sun is the center of the universe, because it would mean everything that I've known up until will be wrong. And academia reifies that. And I think that's a problem in the institution itself. And there is merit to blaming institutions where there is actual flaws. Like, I cannot avoid that. And then there is merits to telling the individual to pick himself up as well. Right? I have only suffered through a brief depressive episode. And I would tell myself every day, I don't need nobody. I would remain in this very bed. I would break down slowly. My will would break down slowly, but I'd be like, I'm not going to talk to my friends about it. I'm not weak. I'm a fucking man. I'm going to pick myself up. And then one day I was like, for who am I putting this show on? I need somebody to talk to me right now. And I called the very person who lives in the next room, and I was like, please talk to me. I'm dying inside. And that was a place where I had to pick myself up in a different way.
I find that isolation is one of the main variables that kind of exasperates a lot of mental disorders.
Edward Torrey Higgins, shared reality.
Yeah.
See, and that's where it gets complicated. But you were looking at my books earlier, and I have a notion about the kind of books that somebody keeps. Even though I barely read any of them, I have read some of them. I go over some of them when context presents itself. I think that presence influences the way I think. I think just buying Kuhn's Revolutions in Science, that's the name of the book?
Yes.
Right? It just does something to the way you think.
Absolutely. I think, I wish I knew the person who said this.
Right.
Once again, paraphrasing, not only because I don't know the person's name, I don't even remember what he said, but it's just I see the essence of it in my like train of thought. And it was, someone asked this person, he walked into his personal study.
I think I gave you that story.
It was you.
Yeah, I told you that story.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Umberto Eco's anti-library.
Yes, it was you.
Yes.
So please tell me.
So
yes.
This is Nicholas Nassim Taleb. He's a professor at NYU, also a trader and broker. He opens his book with this concept. His book called Black Swan, and he says a person walks into Umberto Eco's library, huge library, books everywhere, and he's like, "So how many of these have you read?"
Yeah.
And then Umberto Eco starts laughing. He's like, "Do you think knowledge is an ornament? Do you think these books?" It is. I think the sweet spot of knowledge is knowing what you don't know, because what you know is boring. What you don't know is just beyond you. It is in knowing what I don't know that actual scholarship exists. And that is what Umberto Eco's anti-library represents. It's in the books that I have not read but I know exist and know what they say, that true scholarship. Or it could be just like a masturbatory process that I'm trying to tell myself, hey, you don't read books, it's fine. But on the other hand, this is the argument. It's in knowing what I don't know that I actually know something new.
And I think, you circling back, I think that's another thing of why I said naive, because I know how much I don't know, and I'm already just beginning, like this journey,
right,
in academia, and it's already so exciting and illuminating, but disheartening, because even if I give this a lifetime, I'll still don't know so much, right? And the second thing was a humbling effect. I think having an ego is one of the worst things you could have. and I'm hopefully spending my life diminishing an ego, and I'm just this entity, an agent that allows an individual to have the capacity to create change, but with no ego attached to that.
Right. I think with people like you and I, and this is a particular variety of people who are constantly fighting not to be egoistic, what we do is we don't give ourselves credit. And there's a risk to be extracted.
Absolutely.
There, right?
Absolutely.
It's in the, I don't want to be egoistic, I don't want to run away with my thoughts.
Absolutely.
I don't want to, so we start reifying the voice of hedge too often. So people like you and I need to be a little more careful. But here's my question to you. You have recently gotten into academia, and my understanding is that your intent is to eventually transition into psychotherapeutic sciences. Like, you want to be a therapist.
I want to do a multifaceted thing.
A multifaceted thing.
So not only do I want to be a professor, but I also want to have my own private practice doing psychotherapy.
Right.
I also want to be a writer. I want to be a consultant.
And you're also working with the United Nations as of now.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. And what are you consulting them with?
Well, typically, once again, I am in the bottom rungs, placing my ego down, like shutting it down.
Don't do that, man.
No, kidding.
In the building in the world. Building. Yeah.
The United Nations is currently at crisis right now in terms of reorganization. And at the same time, psychology is it's in the basement of where they string the material to influence their policies from. They do not care, let alone know anything about psychology. So me and a group of other psychology fellows are at the UN trying to kind of bring awareness and influence global policies on mental health. And how does this do? How do you do this? You help kind of facilitate discourses between psychologists from the APA, the American Psychological Association from DC, with the UN diplomats. You create events on certain committees, but through that, and I'm starting to realize this, there's so much bureaucracy and so much red tape that one has to go to make a blimp of a change.
Yeah. I want to add that comma.
Yes.
You spent
that I feel like I am not doing anything.
Right.
I'm just stuck in committees, arguing like certain what should we make this event or this topic, or how are we going to X, Y, and Z. But in reality, I feel like I'm not doing anything.
Right.
But hopefully it is doing something. But yes.
Right.
At the UN,
yes,
there is a potential to make change, but something needs to occur. Like, something different needs to change, where even the prestige of the United Nations always will be there, but its actual functional implementation in our world today is diminishing.
Right. Oh, right. I see. I have always found the League of the Nations and the United Nations to be like such a proxy. I'm more of a pessimist when it comes to, and I think this is a recent thing I've picked up since I've started listening and reading to a lot of Zizek. But I get influenced like that. I had a Jordan Peterson phase where I was just like right into that, and I'm sort of having a Eric Weinstein, Slavoj Zizek phase in that sense. But I think it is a very appropriate forum to inculcate, because an idea that the United Nations adopt, everybody is almost supposed to adopt, especially on the lines of human rights and human conditions and so on. And I think it's a good place to begin. My question, why I wanted to see what aspects of your life you're looking to explore, is because I remember us talking about, and feel free to like be uncomfortable about talking about it, but we were talking about psychedelics and how they bleed into the concept of well-being and mental health and psychology in general and all of that. And you told me you'd done some research along those lines. Had you, or were you interested in doing some research along the lines?
I have a few colleagues who are interested in that field and are trying to kind of start the process of doing psilocybin-assisted therapy and other psychedelic implementations in psychotherapy, at least to kind of exponentially increase kind of the treatment of certain disorders.
Right.
But once again, it's a very tricky tricky situation in terms of dealing with IRB and doing and getting the ethical kind of stamp of doing that type of research, because it is illegal in the United States. So as a result, a lot of the studies on psychedelics are done through and by psychiatrists, not psychologists.
Okay. Because for me, in my early years, psychedelics were a means of expressing rebellion. Nothing else. They were just this reminiscent of the counterculture in the 70s that floated to my present somehow as soon as I was 17, 18. And I grew up in a, the concept of enantiodormia. Is that the concept that Jung has? We went over that.
Not familiar with it.
Oh, okay. So we went over that in the class. It was part of the whole midterm phenomena as well. And it's basically, if you repress your personality, the other end sort of emerges as soon as, right? So like because my freedom was restricted.
Sounds like a Freudian defense mechanism.
It was more Jungian. This is Carl Jung. This is Jung's idea. But yeah, it is sort of that. It's like you put on a show for the longest time and then suddenly you can no longer, so you burst open on the other end. And my childhood was like that, very compressed, out of my own fear and then other dynamics. As soon as I had the medium, that became a medium of rebellion. I have only now come to face with a more mature understanding as far as that phenomena is concerned. And I think it's a powerful phenomena. And I think as paradigms move around, it would form a very seminal part of our societies. For it sounds like a very absurd notion right now. It seems like almost like a joke, because acid is something you pop in your friend's older brother's garage, and you listen to trip hop and it's caricatured right now. But I think in the past it had a very solid significance, and I think I think psychology is the interface where we're beginning to realize the actual significance of psychedelic substances and their use. And I have a feeling they will be very solid contributors to our society 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line. But there is this concept called the noetic quality. Have you heard that?
Noetic quality, no.
I think noetic and autonoetic were two terms coined by Edward Tulling. He's some ancient psychologist, something along those lines.
Sure.
But the noetic quality is basically having belief in your experiences, especially of a mystical nature, where you believe some truth was revealed to you. And psychedelics have that very seminal experience handing power to them.
I think sometimes there's a fallacy with psychedelics. And the fallacy is it reveals some kind of grand truth that was unknown to you, right? In reality, I think what psychedelics do is just a steroid of one's psyche that's already there. It's amplified in a kind of somewhat delusional state due to the nature of the biochemistry of it. But the answers that get revealed to you, or whatever profound epiphany one may occur,
is the value you put in it.
It's the value you put in it.
Right.
So why is there such a grand kind of therapeutic change that occurs from psychedelics? Because there's already intention that you want to get better and do better, but provides a medium where that possibility was not one.
It's catalyzed. The possibility is catalyzed. But here is where I think I have a disagreement to pull in that.
Sure.
Of course, I've seen enough, including my own history, I've seen enough cases where you romanticize the experience that you have on psychedelics to almost insert an epiphany when there is none, right? Sometimes even that, you caricature your own self in that sense. But the very fact that people come out from those experiences and they don't treat them like random dreams or illusions or any of that they think that there was that if anything it was real. Nobody on ayahuasca will say, I was in the Amazon shitting for 6 days lying in mud. They will say, I was looking at the universe, man. And it is the belief in just the semantics of that experience that there is this magical co-evolution that we've had with these plants. It expresses itself. And in that sense, I think why that difference is significant is because that is a difference in conceptualizing reality as a whole. That's the notion of functional reality, like I call it. I think because I believe it's true, no matter how stupid that belief is, my behavior attunes itself to that belief. As soon as that happens, it's more real than real itself. As far as the psychology of my being is concerned, I'm going to make my decisions like that is real. And that's all that matters. That's all that matters. But far more importantly, why these substances are important is not just because they catalyze in some ambiguous sense these changes to occur, these possibilities to happen, stuff where intent and motivation have been latent. It's not just that there's a spark, but also that they inhabit the possibility of what Kuhn tried to say in that book, paradigm shifts. They become so real.
Yes.
When you experience reality, the same stuff, I'm seeing Adam again, but it's just absolutely novel. Like, I've never seen this room before. You understand how many layers to your perception exist. You understand the layers of your perception.
Yeah, many people report the psychedelic experiences are in the top 5 the most cherished and grand kind of experiences that they've ever had in their whole entire life, comparably to having a child,
right,
or getting married, and these kind of milestones one has.
Right.
And it has long-lasting, significant, and also positive changes just from one single dose. You don't have to. There doesn't have to be a continued
process
exposure
at all. And you know why I almost always address sex and drugs and stuff like that in conversations that I do is very similar to Jung's idea of accepting your shadow. It's a societal shadow, our sex and drugs in our times, the residue of the societal shadow. And so I always make it a point to, or I don't always make it a point, but it's sort of a thing that I think we need to have a mature conversation about as a society. Especially sex in the Eastern Hemisphere of our world, from where I come from, it's because we don't talk about sex maturely that all this perversion occurs. And the same with phenomena of substance. I come from a more libertarian view in that sense, where it's up to you, do whatever the fuck you have to do. But tell me, if there is space in even the imaginative concept of Adam's future for stuff like this, for stuff like abstract psychedelics, or like is there even scope for you ever writing about it, or you ever exploring these ideas academically or intellectually? How much do you vibe with the ideas of mysticism in this sense?
I'm staying silent because I want to give you a thoughtful answer.
No, that's all right.
I think there is a potential, but as the same thing as how much what one studies is their identity,
right?
Or at least maybe not through one's perception, but how others perceive you. It can be a potential. I've always been interested in psychedelic research, but I don't think it would be a main focus of mine. I think I would rather love to collaborate with certain individuals who do research like this, like at the University of Surrey, London, I believe. I think they just created their own center for psychedelic research. I think the first in the world as well. Or maybe it was the University of London.
UCL, was it?
UCL.
UCL, yeah. That's
so.
University City of London, yeah.
But what I'm curious about for you, though, how long have you been in New York City?
2 years plus a few months.
What do you think about the most when you're in your room, when you're walking down the street, in classes? What ponders your brain?
There is, I think the best way to answer that is to draw an analogy of Pac-Man, yeah. Where is the next bite? For me, it's always just that. It's legit. And I mean, the form and shape of the bites change. I've never really admitted it to someone before, but for the longest time when I came here, sex was that bite. I just wanted to explore my personal life in that sense. I wanted to see what beautiful women can I meet, and I met so many that my head exploded. Like, it literally did. And then I was like, no. So that the goal keeps changing. Off late, it's been information, knowledge, conversations. Conversations have been a steady theme in my life for 6 years. But New York's an incredible place. I think it's a machinery. I don't think it's a city. I think of it as a machinery. You've got to play by its rule to win. If you play by its rules for however long you stay here, it'll throw you out to be the kind of person you'd respect. But you've got to play by its path. Like, there is enough enough legroom to not play by New York's rules. You can party from Friday to Sunday and show up hungover at work on Monday, but that's not playing New York right, in my view. I think the way you play New York right is understand the selective pressures, understand how strong competition's here, and understand how you work your way around. What is it that people are missing? Warmth, right? You understand all of those little nuances. It's really in the, and I'm really not an expert in New York. It's just been my view over the last 2 years. I understand why people are apathetic in New York. I don't blame them. It's, if there is 4 people that live in this apartment, and if I, as much as even bang this wall, everybody in this apartment can hear it. There is lack of lack of private space, psychologically speaking. Even if we have our own rooms, we don't really have our own rooms for the sake of functional reality. And people don't really get alone time in the city as such. Therefore, they're always averse to people and interaction on the street because they're like, my life's fucked up already, my man. Like, don't try to talk to me here. There is a threshold of crazy which is unlike any other city in the world as far as I've been to. Like, you operate from a place that if somebody is drooling from their mouth lying horizontally in the middle of your subway car at 3 a.m. in the morning, it's normal. You should not approach it because it happens. And it makes for a circus in my view. I as far as my Columbia experience goes, I love being in New York, man. I think it's so exciting.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Do you have a more pessimistic view or a more optimistic view than that?
What do I think about?
Yeah. What do you think about New York?
I hated it when I first moved there. I'd been here for about a year and a half.
Right.
I only hated it for a very short period of time, like a week. But then I started to love it. But the reason why I think I hated it was I didn't find meaning in what I was doing. It wasn't until I found meaning that I started to appreciate for what it was.
Where did you move from?
Opportunities. Connecticut. But I think also New York is a very weird place. Like you were saying.
An experiment, a circus, a machine, not a city. Don't call it a city.
You can find any niche that you want, any of your interests. There is a community, there is something of that. As well as, why do people come here? For only one reason. Initially, it might change, but to elevate and increase their status of life, to chase their dreams, to increase a deficiency that they didn't have, or a deficiency that they do have. For me, that was, what was that? It was one of those things. What I just did was, I was thinking, I don't have the answer, but I'm just going to say like I have the answer, and hopefully the answer would just pop up in my head.
No, sometimes I do that too. Almost all my podcasts are just that. Who's listening, that's what I do. All of this is being. No, but for me, it was, I was like, I saturated the small pond I grew up in. I was like, I need something bigger, and I got the biggest bite of my life. And the first few weeks I was here, I was like, dude, stop thinking you're smart, because you're fucking not. These people are smart. And it was such a humbling experience. I was like, how?
But isn't that great though?
Oh,
being
so
the stupidest person in your room.
It's the best. It's the best.
That's what I strive for. I hope I'm the stupidest person.
No, yeah, like if you're the smartest person in all rooms you're walking into bad rooms. You're walking into just not the most optimal rooms for yourself, man. Find better rooms.
I want to ask you this question. It's a phenomenon I've experienced, and I've been trying to think about it, and I kind of have a slight idea why, but I want to know if you experienced this. If you're in a lecture, a symposium, a talk, whatever it may be, if someone is presenting a set of ideas or theories or trying to explain something to you, whatever it may be, and you already know it, not only do you know it, but you know the ins and the outs, the critiques, the pros, the cons, whatever. It's boring you, right? What do you feel? For me, I get a sense of contempt for some reason. It's more of like, who do you think you're? Like, I already know this, right? Like, and I'm thinking to myself, why do I feel like that?
Very interesting.
And do you get that? How do you feel when someone tells you the obvious?
Very often people confuse me for being self-obsessed or narcissistic in my views, in the sense where I wouldn't wait for you to finish, I'd say something. I wouldn't wait for people to finish discussing, I'd say something. I've cultivated stopping myself from saying something.
Yeah.
And people have thought it's because I think I have grandiosity or some kind of a delusion of that nature. No, the reality is I think I know this, let's move forward. For me, the bite is on the other side of the statement. It's not that I'm trying to validate my own argument. It's just that, yeah, I get that, let's move further, right? In all fairness, without disrespect to Scott, most of this class is all that I've thought about for the entirety of my life. So what did I do? I created a technology on top of Scott's class, which is the exchange you and I have. That's the value for me in the class. It's the growth challenges that the value are. I don't care how much I score in the midterm. I don't care I did not even look up the midterm until a night before the midterm. I did not. I was like, what's the point?
Yeah, like for me, my answer was when I was younger, and that feel of contempt, right, stems from my own childhood, where I felt I did not compare to other individuals in my class. I always tried to stay humble, but at the same time, so much so I thought I was worse than other individuals, right? And that let me think about this.
While you think about it, I think for me, it operates on a scale of fun and boring, and it's like this very it's like this very it's childish in some sense, but it has no person to it, like it has no personal so attribution to it at all. For me, it's very simple. Are you entertaining me or are you boring me? I would be in the same room that I've loved for the longest time, listening to the same man talk, and I'd be like, today Scott is boring me, or today Scott's really interesting. I'm having so much fun. For me, that's how the scale operates. I remember a time where there was contempt, where I would be like, who the fuck do you think are you to tell me how to do this? I know this. What that would lead to is my attention trailing off, and then me not thinking. I now see it as an opportunity. I'm like, definitely. If I came up with that, if I know that from without ever having for you to say it, then there is definitely wrong with it. So let's see how we can improve that. And that's why I shoot the texts across to you. This is what I think. This is what occurred to my mind. This is what occurred to my mind. Chris Fraley's research is deficient in this sense, and so and so and so and so. Because for me, that's the only way I can make it to be more fun. Otherwise, I will just sit there and I will fool $10,000 worth of education just because it was an easy class. I don't want that. I don't want that. That's not the money, and that's not what I'm paying money for. That's unreasonable. So yeah, that's what I do. I add more technology to it. Every time I feel like I'm the smartest person in the room, I make it worse for myself. I change rooms. I design the room better, and that's the first 4 years of my adulthood were being the biggest fish in a small pond, and then just beating your chest every day. Hell yeah, you cut it, you did it. And then I'm like, but what's it for? Like I get so stuck. I'm like, I need to evolve, man. How long do I expect to be the smartest person in the room and pat my own back for that? And that's why I think being the stupidest person in the room is the best, because you have the longest, like you can stay in this room for the longest time. Less uncertainty. This is the certain devil I know, let's beat this. And then you keep fighting, and then you keep fighting. But that's how I deal with information that I have processed before coming my way. It's obviously imperfect, because I came up with it casually. So let's do each other one better. Let's have sincere thoughts combined and see where we can lead that. Sometimes I just get like impatient. I'm like, come on, move. Like it's very stupid in that sense. I'm like, move to the crux. Let's get to the. Sometimes I'm like, and you also have to face with a lot of arguments that don't like. I can see when people's desires are interacting with their intellectual merit. Right? When somebody is trying to make an argument for something and it's basically their desire coming in the way, they want this to be true. That's why they're saying this. And that is a way harder puzzle to face than anything else. You're like, fuck, man. Like
a good idea
huh.
with the right context and reasoning, with the right answer, and it's and the merits for that. It's like a good meal, right?
Uh-huh.
You feel full. You
Yeah.
feel satiated.
Yes.
You're like, that's it.
Right. And it's interesting that it's in writing that Google Doc to you after every class, or for that matter, sitting, because the sessions that we have, the discussion sections that we have, they aren't intellectually stimulating, but they're stimulating in every other way. Everything I say there, I've been exploring myself.
But I think it's designed that way
Mm-hmm.
for a purpose.
The feedback I get, and this is no offense to any of the other TAs because I don't know, I haven't sat in them. The response that I get from my friends who are in this class, they don't find their discussion sections as interesting. Either they're doing it wrong, they're not exploring themselves the way I am allowing myself to, or it's not being facilitated right. Because I have learned so much about myself in this class, so much, that I have new pieces on the board to play with. I can entertain myself for another 6 months with this stuff. I now know that I'm insecure in these areas and I'm afraid of these things, and the feedback that, and I thought, my mind's so weird, I continuously think that the peers that I have in the class think I'm weird, non-stop. Even when they walk up to me and tell me, hey, stop thinking about it, you're just doing fine, you're absolutely on point. After all those compliments that were given to me on the back of my, on the sheet of paper that was stuck to my back, it was still so hard. I was like, these people are just saying it, they don't mean it. Because I'm so bent on thinking that my proactivity is weird for some reason. And it just makes for I just come home laughing. I'm like, why the fuck do I think that? Like, it's so weird that that's my natural response. So weird. That's self-discovery. I think very few interfaces in reality really allow you to see yourself for that. Romance is one of them. Silence is another. And then you and Kaufman and everybody else have managed to create this small little piece of apparatus in the architecture of school that if people were to utilize properly, it's a process of self-discovery like no other. His growth challenges, phenomenal. If somebody's to really sit to them and do that, phenomenal stuff. No doubt.
I think the reason why it's so profound too is because whether you realize it or not, a lot of people don't do a lot of introspection of how they feel, why they feel that way. And to have the opportunity to not only explore the inner playground of one's mind and being, it's a special opportunity, I think. And what I do, I mean, you compliment me, so, and Scott as well, so on my behalf, at least for me, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, it really means a lot to me, but I'm not really doing much. What I do is I create a space where I create a non-judgmental environment where I'm not going to judge what anyone says or what they do. And then I also just bring my own authentic being, right?
You think that's easy to do?
And I also, at least for me, try to identify, and this is coming from a very humanistic viewpoint, that everyone has their own unique gift, right? And try to identify that and try to foster it. Put a little bit of water on that seed. And that's all I'm trying to do. So I observe this through everyone's reflections and their discussions. I see everyone's unique gift and viewpoint and what they're trying to accomplish or what they're struggling with. And I push a little bit, I question it. I provide a little bit of feedback, a little bit of comment. And it's up to the person if they're going to embrace that sense of insecurity, if they want to share it with the class.
Do you think that's easy to do? It's a rhetorical question. Don't answer that. It's not. My whole point is that's one of the hardest things to do is create that concordment in the right proportions. And I think you're doing a good job, and I think you should take credit for that, at least from me, because I found value, and I barely find value in classrooms, man. I barely do. It's in the grass for me. It's in the open, drinking coffee and talking about stuff where I get most of it. Like I said, it's in experiments that I run with myself.
And I also, a second thing, you said it's like none of your classes you've ever had before.
Right.
And I almost, this wasn't created before I knew this. It was during the mid of the semester that I had this like realization that there's so much intellectual bravado and machismo of
I know this
and this and mystifying kind of how we talk and what we say, right? Because if it's more complicated, I don't understand what they're saying, it must be more smarter, it must be more important.
Right.
If you can say things as simple as possible, and I learned this from a professor, where if you can provide narratives and stories and concrete examples for theoretical conceptualizations, then you have it on the money. But if you can't, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just mystifying what you're insecure about.
Right.
I bring that attitude of
touche.
I'm not going to intellectualize anything here. We're going to talk about the experiential. We might have questions about concepts if one brings it up, but that's not my concern. My concern is you and the other classmates.
Right. But touche to that, because I fall victim to that sometimes. It was a moment of revelation where I was like, maybe I do this. Oh, maybe I should go check this. But this has been super fun. Do you know how long we've been at it? Can you guess? What would your guess be?
An hour and a half.
Almost an hour and a half. It's been super fun.
I want to go for 5 hours.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a compliment I hope to receive. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you. Have a good time.